right, guys, welcome back to Elite Start Training and welcome back to our track awareness portion of our basic search operations course. And in this next video, we're going to continue the discussion on what are the actions to be taken after finding a track. So in the last video, we talked about determining the direction of travel and using a tracking stick. So now we're going to move into communicating tracks. Once we find a track, we need to preserve that area and mark the track. So whenever we're marking the track, you really need to consider those consequences of disturbing potential evidence. There's a couple different techniques for how you can mark a track, but being cognizant of the scene, you want to exercise a little bit of care whenever you do this. Many man tracking classes and textbooks refer to the Ab Taylor method for marking tracks, and that's by either if you have a complete track, you can draw take your tracking stick and you draw a complete circle around the track, and then you do a hash mark off to the side, a tick mark off to the side to indicate which foot made the track. Or if you have a partial track, which you have in the example here in the middle, you do a semicircle around that track, and again, a hash mark. If you have enough information to determine which foot made that track, you do a hash mark off to the side there. That's one way to mark that track, but a less intrusive way to mark tracks, and it's still considered acceptable, is to put a small stick or a flag at the heel of the track on the same side of whatever foot made the track. So we have a track here, and it's a right foot. Okay, so we have ourselves the stick. We put it at the heel of the track, and you can see it's leaning to the right. The stick is on the right heel of the track, but it's also leaning to the right. So that's an indicator to us that is a right track. After preserving the scene and marking the visible tracks in the area, it's important to gather additional information that can be communicated back to the incident command or a more qualified man tracker. So in order to do this, we need to take measurements and we need to record the track in some way, so that way we can communicate what we find back to the appropriate source. So as a rule, always have a small tape measure in your pack, because there are some things that we do need to take measurements on if we have enough track there to take a measurement on. So some of the things that we want to measure along with an individual track, we'll want to start with the overall track length. The overall track length from the heel to the toe. Okay, the overall track length is something we want to mark. And if we have the opportunity to do that on both feet, go ahead and do it. It should be pretty close to the same, but there may be variances, and there more so when we get into step and stride. There's more variances there. But do it for both tracks, both feet, if you have both of them. Sole length is another measurement we want to take. The impression of the sole, the same thing with the heel. In the middle here, we have the instep. This is another measurement that we can take as well. The instep length. Again, the sole is going to be the front part of the foot. The heel is going to be the back, but we want the sole length, the heel length, the width of the sole, and then the width of the heel. Those are measurements we want to take as well. Clear this here, move on to the next slide. And those measurements are for individual tracks. And for if we have a series of tracks, then there's additional measurements that we want to take here as well. We'll start with the stride length. The stride length is going to be if we have, we want to mark two of the same track. Okay, so we have two lefts here. So we have left number 1 and left number 2. We go from the same heel to heel on this, and now it depends on what you have available to you. If you don't have a clear heel on both, but maybe you have a clear toe on both, you have enough there to take a stride measurement based off of the toe or the instep or whatever information that you have available to you. The idea is you go same foot on stride as opposed to step. Step is going to be opposite feet. Okay, so here we're going heel to heel. From here, we're going heel to heel on the same foot. Or I'm sorry, on opposite feet for step. Same foot is going to be stride, different feet are going to be step. But we just go from this heel to this heel, from this heel to this heel, or toe to toe, toe to heel. Whatever information you have available to you, the big thing here is as you're recording these measurements, put down what the measurement is. Left heel to left heel, left toe to right heel. Those measurements mean something to us when we're trying to communicate this to somebody else. If you give them just a series of numbers with no context, they're going to have a hard time deciphering what that is. And again, with the idea of being a man tracker, you can distinguish someone else's tracks from somebody else, even if they're wearing the same shoe tread, same shoe size. There's usually enough information in the measurements to where we can tell those apart. So be specific as you're recording that. If we look at the center line of the track, we talked about this earlier with determining direction of travel. There's a center line that's going to ride down the middle of all of these tracks, and there's a couple measurements that we want to take off of that. If we take the center line of this specific track versus the center line of this track, this distance in between is called the straddle. Okay, this is how far their feet are spread apart from each other as they're walking through. That's depending on how someone walks. It could be more exaggerated than others, depending on where their foot placement is. If they're carrying load, that all plays into how that straddle measurement is going to read out. So that's a measurement that if we have an opportunity to record that, we should. And then also the pitch, and there's a couple different ways to do the pitch angle. You can do it as a measurement from the center line of the track to the tip of the toe, and however many inches that is in between, that determines the pitch. And then also another way you can do that is you can take like a compass, for example, and say that this is a reading of 0. How many degrees off is that center line of track? That could be the pitch as well. So there's a couple different ways that we could do pitch, but that's another important measurement for us to take, just so that way we can see how pointed out or pointed in someone's feet are, whether or not they're walking duck-footed or pigeon-toed. It tells us things from a tracking perspective. It tells us, what condition they're in, if they're tired, if they're unstable with their footing because they're carrying load, or if they're carrying something in one hand. We can start to tell that based off of some of those precise measurements. So if we can get some of that information ahead of time and get that to a qualified man tracker, that's very helpful information for them as well. Okay, and again, a lot of this is determined off of that person's baseline. Someone may naturally have a very wide straddle or a very wide pitch, just because that's the way they walk. But so that's for the man tracker to understand exactly what's normal for that person. And whenever we observe a change, what could that change possibly mean here? A lot of teams, they'll carry, or a lot of man tracking teams will produce a tracking card that we'll carry with us on all of our searches. I don't think I have an example here in front of me, but a tracking card is a very good way to record this information. You can record it in your notepad that you bring out there with you. The tracking card is going to have some of that information already printed out on there and a reminder of what measurements to take. I have mine printed out on some Write in the Rain paper, so that way if it's wet, it's still something I can write on. And I've got a few blank pages of notebook paper in between. It looks like a little book is what it looks like. So that way, if I need to record something or sketch something, I've got that there as well. It's a little book for that particular search is the way I've got it lined up. But I've got these measurements already prompted where all I need to do is fill in the values. Pull out my tape measure and fill in the values. Last slide here on communicating tracks. We'll talk about photographing a track versus sketching a track. We have a couple options of how we can record that track. We can either photograph it or we can sketch it. But there's pros and cons to both approaches here. If we're going to photograph, the advantages are it's quicker than sketching, and it includes a visual depiction of the substrate. You can see exactly how that track was captured in a photograph. Some of the disadvantages of that you may lose a little bit of the scale whenever it comes to a photograph. You can get in pretty close to a track, to snap a picture to capture detail, but if you don't lay something down for scale, that can be lost in that. A big disadvantage is your phone or camera can be considered evidence if this turns into a criminal search for us. Your phone can be potentially considered evidence at that point, and it can be collected. So it puts you at a not a great advantage whenever you're photographing tracks. And it does not allow the searcher to become intimately familiar with the track, which is something that a sketch would be able to. Whenever you take a photograph, you get the photograph, but you haven't taken the time to really study the track at that point, which is something that sketching allows. It allows you to become intimately familiar, and it's easier to reference the measurements. Along with that, you can write the measurements right beside the sketch on the piece of paper, so that way it's right there. It's in one place. On a photograph, you would have to figure out a way to attach that along with it somehow. The disadvantages of sketching is it takes a little bit of time to complete, and it takes a lot of practice and patience to become proficient at it. And then it also requires some pre-planning on your part. Make sure that you've got your notepad, your pencil. If you take the time ahead of time to do the track cards, that way you've got those handy. You already have kind of the outline of the foot, and you just need to fill in the gaps. It takes a little bit of pre-planning to make sure that that's done right. All right. So again, whenever we're out there tracking, we're trying to find the tracks, preserve it, collect some data, and establish a direction of travel. And at this skill level, at the awareness level, we don't want to proceed any further without an experienced tracker. Whenever we find it, we preserve it. We don't really want to proceed any further unless we have someone else there that can help us, guide us through without disturbing the evidence. So an experienced tracker, if you have one of those available to you, they may ask you to be part of a tracking team to continue working the line of track. And that's going to be the subject of our next video here, is to start talking about the tracking team and how we can contribute as a member of that. So thank you for watching this video.